Welcome back to another edition of Unicorn Dispatch Live with your host, Bryson Bort, founder and CEO of Scythe. And I'm joined today by a longtime friend and fellow Sasquatch, which we'll have to get into that story, Casey Ellis.
Hello.
Casey, what mistakes in life have brought you to this point here on the show?
Several. Like we'll probably go into that. It's hard to kind of pin that down as an opening question. So let's move on.
Well, why don't we start with your introduction? So why don't you tell our good viewers at home who you are and why you're here?
Yeah, sure. So I am probably best known as the founder of Bugcrowd. I also co-founded a thing called the Disclose.io project. Serial entrepreneur, mentor to as many folk as I can in the cybersecurity founder and the hacker space. And that's something that I've kind of really locked into over the past 12 years. I don't know. There's a lot. The title thing, I can just give you that, and we'll go from there.
Okay.
Yep.
So I want to start off with something a little bit different because a lot of folks are friends of mine, and I've met and worked with a lot of great folks over the years. But I think our initial meeting is particularly interesting 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd like you to give your perspective on that meeting as opposed to where I'm going to gloss over how I behaved.
Yeah, honestly, I think you behaved like a gentleman. So there is that. But yeah, we were having a conversation around, can you apply crowdsourced security testing to hard targets like automotive? And you and I had a bit of a difference of opinion on that. And I guess the thing that I was invoking at the time is that, look, most of the cutting edge research that drives frontier growth in security comes from the research community, not necessarily from a constrained group of people, no matter how good that group of people is. So yeah, I'll eventually win. And that's kind of where it went from there. Yeah. So, from my perspective, that was a fun little, it's funny. I tell that story to some folk. It's like, this is how Bryson and I had a relationship, because you were kind of adamant that the crew that you were working with at the time wouldn't ever be beatable by the crowd. And, for me, in my gut, I kind of knew that as an issue of physics and as nothing to do with you, your team, or your crew, that just wasn't true. So, part of what I was trying to do at the time with Bugcrowd and continue to do to this day is to precipitate that future where, the physics of attack and defense play out. But yeah, that's how we first met. You said I was wrong, and I said you were wrong, and yeah.
So I was hoping for a lot more color than that, but let's back up. So first of all, why don't you talk about Hack the Pentagon? Because that was a big deal at the time, and that was ultimately what facilitated you meeting me at the gastropub.
That's right. Yeah, no, for sure. So that was really interesting, and I guess if you want to add some of the color that you're referring to here, that might be useful as well, because I'm not sure I'm hitting quite the right mark. But the whole idea of uncleared researchers being in a position to be kind of approved to do security research on the public attack surface on unclassed networks and those different things, and for them to find things and be able to actually provide benefit back into the DoD. That was this is probably what, 2014, 2013?
15.
Okay, cool. So we're a little ways into it at that point, and Hack the Pentagon was definitely an initiative that had been kind of kicked off and that, the DoD showed intent to kind of go off and do. But yeah, the idea of, quote unquote, the unwashed masses coming in and being in a position where they can actually help, the apex predator and defender on the planet, do their IT stuff better. We had probably a little bit of a difference of opinion on that as well, because, I was thinking about it again as an issue of, physics, just the number of systems that are out there, how vulnerable everything is, and just the incredible diversity that exists within the hacker community, full stop. Yeah.
And so that was Lisa Wiswell, who was the key executive in the Pentagon who facilitated that.
Yes.
And Lisa recommended that Casey and I meet. And so it was It was at a gastropub about 2 miles from the Pentagon, downtown Arlington, where I got to meet Casey for the first time. And me being me, I had opinions. And you actually summarized mine a little differently than I recall it. So
Okay.
I'll share my side of it, which is I decided to weigh in on where I saw what Casey was building with Bugcrowd, what I thought the challenges and limitations were. I didn't say one was better than the other. I didn't suggest that. What I was saying is, like, if we're going to hack cars, that right now with your current model isn't going to work, because again, this ties back to my background with embedded devices and industrial control systems.
Sure. Yeah.
These are challenges of virtualization and access we still haven't solved today. And in fact, it was a constraint when for the ICS Village, the nonprofit I run with Tom Van Norman, that with COVID and our CTF at DEF CON, we were like, well, this technology of virtualization and access still hasn't been solved. So we had to come up with our own technology to support the capture of the flag at DEF CON, because these devices are not meant to have multiple people accessing them at the same time or multiple people on host. So that restricts what you can do from a security research perspective. And so that's where I got passionate and feisty like I typically do. And I meet this, kind gentleman who is tolerating this across the table.
And 2 years into the country and not wanting to start too many fights as well. So there is.
Well, you referred to the apex predator, and I'd been a part of that. So maybe that was what was working in my favor.
Yeah, fair enough.
But I was almost literally like poking him in the chest, being like, "This is what you need to do with Bugcrowd to take the next step." Yeah. Now, what Casey's referring to is I also am the founder of Grim, who was a dedicated security research company for that kind of thing. And so there was something of a competition. And at that time, that kind of work was only our purview. And I wasn't suggesting that would always be the case. I was just highlighting the constraints in the model.
And like, honestly, to be fair to your retelling of the story and kind of the contrast from mine and some of the similarities as well, I think, that whole idea of coming in and basically trying to redefine the paradigm of how defenders access creativity for whatever, that was deeply threatening to the existing pen test community, like full stop at that point in time. And probably a part of how I was interpreting some of the things that you were pushing back on was through that lens. It wasn't so much specific to the use case or the different things that were going on. It was more around, I actually think that security research is going to grow to the point where it becomes more valuable in helping us figure out how we secure the internet than this existing model of paying people by the hour. And it's got nothing to do with those people, right? Like it's you can have the best crew in the world, but ultimately they're trying to compete against a crowd of adversaries that are, diverse. They've got like incentive for results, all those different things. The thing that I came to the US with complete conviction on in 2013 was this idea that like the math is wrong in how we're doing this. And like hackers in general provide the creativity that we need to even have a hope of outsmarting the adversary. I think some of the conversations that you and I had probably felt like it was tweaking on challenging that math, which I had a lot of at that point. But to your credit, like I think that's a part of why we're pretty good mates now. Like it's one of those things where it's like, okay, cool. This is how it played out, and this is what you thought, and this is what I thought, and here's how we work together, and here's probably where it's going.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting context because, of course, for me, that was all relatively new, vulnerability disclosure and bug bounties.
It was new to everyone at that point.
My background was not defense and penetration testing or red teaming. We never paid any attention to any of this stuff. We never cared about defense on our side because that wasn't our job. And so for me, I didn't think about how you probably had heard a lot of that similar, like, I mean, this is part of being a founder, right? Is everybody loves to criticize and everyone lets say, you could do it better. And I think what sets the foundation of our friendship, and I think this is an important model for a lot of folks when you look at, there was a competitive nature to it, but I approached it honestly and open from just this is objectively what I see or what I see the challenges were, as opposed to being sour or competitive in our relationship, our friendship that we've had for a decade.
I think that's right. Yep. 100%.
And even more so, I put my money where my mouth is, because for the last 2 years, Scythe has been a proud customer of Bugcrowd to help make our platform safer and better.
Yep. And how's that going?
I think it's going really well.
Nice. Good.
So let's start, because our introduction kind of got into the content. Let's back up.
I had to retrace a bunch of steps in a very short space of time there, so forgive me for that. But yes,
bug bounties and vulnerability disclosure program. So why don't you talk us through the history of that? Because you are, in fact, not only one of the thought leaders, but you helped build a part of this industry.
Yeah, 100%. And something that I often kind of lead off with when I'm introduced like that is to like really strongly clarify the idea that like Bugcrowd didn't invent, vulnerability disclosure programs or bug bounty programs or even kind of security research. Like all of those things were prior art. The idea that I had was to basically build out something in the middle that reduces all of the friction that prevents, the latent potential on the hacker side of things from being able to contribute to the unmet demand on the defender side of things. So that is the thing that we did that was novel and unique at that point in time. But yeah, look, I think like coming into it all, like there was a couple of things that I had kind of irrationally pissed off issues with, which is, to me, the definition of a founder. Like you get just annoyed about a thing that you think you can solve and you can't shake like the annoyance or the belief at the same time. And, those two things were like the economic mismatch between like the resourcing and creativity available to attackers versus defenders. And then the other side of it was, the fact that like there's this incredible community of hackers that want to work in good faith or however they want to work. But, relative to the first problem, like they want to actually be in a position where they can apply themselves to helping make the internet a safer place, that feel like they're criminal. And, are chilled from contributing, like they're disconnected from being a part of the solution, all those different things. And yeah, like those were kind of the two things that were bubbling up in my head at the time, like from a solution kind of connection standpoint. Like my entrepreneurial background mostly revolves around the idea of finding a thing that's undervalued and connecting it to a thing that's needed. Like I've done that in all sorts of different other areas, and this was no real exception to that, but it carried the extra weight of it being kind of my people that are involved. The fact that like it's my friends and my family that are being secured in the process if we get it right. And the fact that like there's a lot of opportunity in security research and making that normalized and useful, and to be in a position where you can tell people that are building stuff that like you don't do it perfectly all the time, and that's okay. Like building software is hard. Try not to suck at it as much tomorrow, but like the fact that there's a problem in the first place, like that's not the root cause. The root cause is the fact that you're not necessarily engaging in how to do it better.
Oh, sorry, it froze there for a second. I was just thinking of, obviously we have, I think it's Mark Andreessen who said that software is eating the world. And so we have an exponential increase in software. But going back even further to a genius thinker from the past is John von Neumann, who worked on the Manhattan Project and is actually credited for designing the systems that are how DNA worked before anybody even understood or knew what DNA was. And what he pointed out was that we're going to, and this, what sparked it was your comment earlier on your first recount of our meeting, of how technology is exponentially increasing, but humanity can only linearly increase. And so you see this combination of the increased surface area of software that now, I mean, almost nothing doesn't run without it except for, basic physical objects. And then Newman's view of how technology is going to take, move past humanity's abilities. And so all the more reason that we need some way to harness as much of humanity to that benefit, in this case, assuring the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the software we're making.
Yeah, definitely. And I think two things there. One is that I'm quietly wondering right now, and I can't remember for sure if you and I are in the same thing at the computer science center in San Jose when he actually went through that. Like talking about like, okay, here's like the origin of the internet. Like here are the kind of different nodes that have been created. Here's the, the graph and the plot and kind of how things seems to be going. If you kind of rewind back to the 80s, this is what it infers about the future. And then kind of it goes forward from there. So like, yeah, I think futurists and people that apply stochastic analysis to how the future is going to play out and then try to engage in making those things happen, like either accelerating them in a way that like benefits the participants or, just is a part of telling the story in a way that folk engage with. I think that's a really powerful and fairly rare thing. And it's something that I try to do. But yeah, on the other side of it, like it's one of those things where, from my perspective, the thing that I've kind of always held to, like I get asked a lot these days around like, how is AI going to replace pen testing or attackers, right? And it's a really interesting question to me because I do fundamentally believe that like AI is kind of transformational as a technology, and in 10 years' time, it's going to have touched everything. But at the same time, I don't view it as being any different to when bug bounty hunters started to discover that there was public attack surface laying around on the internet that people had ignored, and it was a really easy way to get bounties to find that, which eventually evolved into the EASM market that we know today, right? So like there's these layers of technology where we figure out like a systemic anti-pattern or a problem that we want to try to identify or solve in security, and then some new technology comes in and gives us a way to actually address that. And then, the bad guys who, by the way, are human, like they're using AI, they're using automation, they're using attack surface management, all those different things. Unless they're inclined to pack up and go home, which, the fact that they don't do that predates the internet by a couple of thousand years. So I don't think that's going to change, right? That's to me where I see the role of human creativity fit into solving these problems kind of in perpetuity. Does that make sense?
It does, because I think of two things. I think about the vulnerability researchers we had in-house, and there was this combination of art and science, right?
Yeah. Yes.
And art, I think, is something that it's hard to imagine AI reaching a sentience where it can transcend human art other than it understanding the patterns and what we've taught it. Now that singularity may be upon us at some point, but that's the current, that is not the current evolution of artificial intelligence.
I actually think the definition of art in that context is kind of under fire right now, but yeah, go on.
And then this begins with 2016 with the DARPA Cyber Grand Challenge, which started to look at how can we use machine learning models, which now have grown into artificial intelligence models, to try to approach that same kind of scientific problem with being able, because I'm trying to think how technical deep to go into how this stuff works, and I think it's not too valuable. And this is part of why we created symbols, because you needed to be able to abstract certain mathematical equations and insights in those formula to understanding then where to optimally find vulnerabilities. And then again, it's not a vulnerability by itself that has value. So one of my quotes is, a vulnerability is not a vulnerability is not a vulnerability. Typically where I'm using that is in the enterprise context of compliance to patch and vulnerability management, which is a vulnerability is only worth something if it's worth something to me. Whereas this at the lowest level is a question of weaponization. What is going to be the return on investment of me harvesting a vulnerability that I can reliably weaponize under certain circumstances?
Yeah, I think weaponization is a child of economics. So like the first question that you asked around like, what is the vulnerability worth? The idea of like, what is a bug worth? That is like anyone who's ever worked with me or, had a like long enough conversation around the problems that I think that we're actually solving here, knows that like this idea of like what is a bug worth is one that keeps me up at night constantly, because like I think you're right not to go too deep into the technical side of things, but something that I do believe that most folk can understand is the idea that like this is an economically rational problem that we're trying to solve here. So like the idea of a bug being found, cool, great, like it is. Now what? Like the question to me is like, what is it worth? And like the logical question that begs, kind of to your point, is to whom, right? Because an attacker with malicious intent might have a different value that they can extract from that vulnerability compared to a defender. But if you can kind of build out, this idea of what the economics of attack and defense actually look like and get us closer to the pin on solving that problem, I do feel like a lot of what the cybersecurity industry does at this point in time, to me feels a lot like band-aids for broken arms. Like, we know that people are freaking out. We know that we can address like the imminent pain that they've got, or the thing that they're getting yelled at about, or whatever else it might be. When I go back to this idea of why I don't believe that AI is going to supplant human security research on the frontier, it's because of why we're all here in the first place, from my perspective, which is that we've got a human adversary that is creative, and it's their job to innovate past what we make hard for them. Like, that's literally the game that we've played since way before the internet, right? So that was a lot, but yeah.
Okay, well, let's follow that thread. So we're gonna circle back to some more foundational things, but I think that's a really interesting piece to follow. So it is an element of economics. I think that's an area where I continue to really preach to the practitioners in our industry. Is we spend a lot of time analyzing the best moves on the chessboard, not recognizing that we need to understand the bounds and where we can stretch those bounds, and what's the game, right? What's the actual game theory of what we're doing? Because that's the level that this stuff is being done at the geopolitical. This is what's being done in the military and the intelligence. I point to myself, how we look at things.
I'd argue it's happening at the cyber criminal level as well, and all the places where those lines are being blurred between each other. So yeah, agree.
And the easiest way that I've summarized that is my quote that hackers are lazy. I'm not going to do more work than I ever have to complete what I need to do.
Yeah. Yep.
And so this is why vulnerabilities compete with the social engineering, the email, the credential theft, and all of the other things that are more simplistic way in. So let's start with that part of the ecosystem. Where do you think vulnerabilities are going to continue to fit within that pantheon? And do you see that sort of rank order changing, or how do you see the game theory evolving over time in the ecosystem?
Yeah, so when I try to get kind of futurist on this stuff, like what I will say is that the introduction and kind of the commoditized availability of AI and the power it gives folk, to me, part of what we've gotten used to as a cybersecurity defense industry over the past 10 or 15 years is like a fairly consistent like cycle time on the OODA loop, right? It's like, cool, bad guys do a thing, we learn that thing, we figure out how to defend it, we try to get ahead of them, we kind of fail at that, they innovate past that, and then the cycle continues. I feel like we're pretty rapidly approaching a point where we can no longer fit inside that loop. And this is where your question of like, what is the game that we're actually playing comes into play. At the same time, you've got like global conflict, you've got, nation on nation, you've got like cyber criminals and like threat actors of all shapes and sizes suddenly coming across a whole bunch of capability that they didn't have before. So like, if you think about a pyramid of skill, we've dropped the bar now where the folks that can get things done is pretty big. And I'm not entirely sure that we're ready for that as an internet. Like, I'm actually very confident that we're not. Probably the bigger thing is that I'm not entirely sure that we're aware of the fact that that's the game that we're actually playing. So this idea of like, yeah, cool, I can, solve your EDR issue in this particular context based on this particular thing that failed in the past, and kind of some of the traditional ways that cybersecurity solutions have been kind of created and grown in market. Some of those haven't been that realistic for a while now, but I think the fact that like we're playing a different game to the one that the industry is trying to address is becoming more obvious, if that makes sense.
So we got a comment slash question from the audience. So I'm struggling to reconcile the widely discussed, and of course, as we've referenced here, ideas of the concept of art being under fire with the fact that hackers are creative, and that's our primary skill value added.
Yeah. I don't like what I said before is, like the idea of like art being under fire. Okay, cool. I saw a generative AI model do autopone on a whole bunch of stuff like 3 years ago. So click, think, boom, right? We're just now starting to talk about the fact that that's possible in the commercial sector. We're just starting to see things that can do that and make that actually happen, get released as like PhD projects and open source programs and all those different things. And, part of what kind of bothers me about it is that it's confused with art. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's literally pattern matching. Like, we know if you've got Salt Typhoon poning things based on, the fact that they've been built on top of like a 12-year-old version of CentOS, we're talking about a different problem. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's not art. That's art in terms of like the goal that the attacker is trying to achieve, maybe. But the whole idea of it being, frontier vulnerability research that actually kind of maintains this bleeding edge of how we're trying to like build things better and how we're trying to attack them. I don't think those are the same thing. So like, that's what I mean by art being under fire. Like this idea of, oh, cool, you can use AI to hack stuff. Yeah, that's 100% true. Like scammers have been using machine learning to improve the efficiency of scam calls for 10 years. Like that predates generative AI. These aren't new things. They're just something that we're all aware of and talking about at the same time. And to that, like to the extent that that redefines our concept of what like true art actually means when it comes to vuln research and discovery, that's kind of what I'm getting at there.
Yeah, so I'll take it broader because I'm going to tie this back to the reason I created the Bryson attack model, which is a three-phase simplistic approach of an attack chain.
Right.
I hate Lockheed Martin's kill chain. There's unnecessary elements that don't matter. MITRE ATT&CK is great for us to have a common vocabulary. It is the most, like anything that's good, it's the most abused thing on the planet, and it's wrong in that regard.
Accurate. I wear those t-shirts, yes.
And so I simplified Bryson's attack model to recon, I build a target package. Initial access, I break in, which is the vulnerability research and weaponization piece, and then post-access. And the reason that we have the challenges and the anxiety and the existential dread that we possess in our industry is because that entire chain is infinite. And here's why it's infinite, and this is why it ties to art, is because it is a mix of social and technical. And by the way, social is not just the common surface area where we denigrate users for using computers. It also includes the dirty secret that most of defense, which is post-access, is people-based. We use tools to tip people. That's where decisions get made, because that's the line I have to walk up to, because if I cross that line, I break something legitimate in my business, and I can't do that. And so the creativity and the art is looking at that infinite attack space and going, and this is what I learned and what I used to do, because everyone looked at us as a technical unit. My teams were technical. We weren't just technical. We were able to use close access methods. We were able to use a whole bunch of clever tricks that had nothing to do with technical for us to get technical things where we needed them to be. And so the creativity and the art is looking at an undefined space and going, all of this is my potential attack chain, not just going, well, this is what I understand my attack chain to be, and this is where I'm going to operate in, because that's all a computer can learn and understand until it's been defined as a potential part of scope for success.
And I think that's the part that people get tripped up on. This idea, like one of my theories around why vulnerabilities exist in the first place is the fact that like people are like creative, we're powerful, we come up with amazing stuff. People are awesome. This is not a diss on people, and there's a lot of upside to human creativity kind of contributing to the internet and society and everything being the way it is right now, right? But at the same time, if you've been human for more than 5 minutes, you also know that we're not perfect. And, part of what comes with that, I think, is this idea that like computers scale that imperfection. Like that's literally their job. It's to take whatever we tell them to do and then to mathematically repeat it as much as they possibly can, which magnifies all of the nuances that go into the creative process of building software or putting a solution together or creating a defensive strategy or offensive plan, like whatever else it might be. And, you know, I don't, again, like coming back to this idea of like, what is the role of security research and people that can think in that way? Like, to me, that's what that is. It's not just a hacker that can find a particular class of bug or like whatever else. It's folk that can kind of navigate the technology environment that they're in, like get to the point where they're at least to some degree understanding the thought process of the designer of it, and then take that, deconstruct it, and build it back into the thing that they want. That to me is what a hacker is, right? And yeah, there's a good side to that and a bad side to that. So it's an interesting kind of time that we're in, because I do think this idea of like AI generated art is, to me, almost the touch point of this conversation. It's like, is that really art or not? Like, you wrote a prompt, but all these other things kind of contributed to doing that. Is that art or is it not art? Like, to me, anything that's a product of human creativity is art. Full stop, period. And, you know, I'll die on that hill.
That's an interesting philosophical assertion you just made. Think about what you just said here. No, science is going to eventually become completely the purview of the machine, whereas art is going to be how we define humanity.
No, I actually, yeah, okay. We can go there. I actually think that scientific discovery is a form of art.
Well, in terms of the way I described it with this, in the infinite space determining that, but I'm now taking us to a future point where the singularity happens, and we now have reached this exponentially expanding technology beyond the rate of human change. Yeah. And that's where that starts to become the purview solely of science and the machine in that post-singularity space, and art becomes that is what humanity is.
All right. So yes,
I did not see this conversation go this way, ladies and gentlemen. Fine. This just got real philosophical, real quick.
It's fine. We can bring it back to the tech if you want, but like, to me, like, part of, like, I think that's the right thought experiment to be having. Where I struggle with the outcome of that thought experiment being like a good, bad, binary, go, no go, like when, that kind of thing, is that like no one really can define what the singularity is or looks like. And also, by the way, like, I would argue that we've been kind of experiencing the impact of automation on the erosion of societal autonomy for, the better part of 20 years at this point, right? Like, post-truth is a social media product. Like, fight me on that. Do you know what I mean? Like, it was one of the things that drove me insane when AI dropped and folk are like, this is going to usher in, a fake news, post-truth, falsehood environment. I'm like, dude, like, where were you in 2008? Like, this is like, we've been on that slippery slope this entire time. I don't necessarily know how I feel about the goodness or badness or whatever else about that. Like, you and I have worked on things where, we've talked about disinformation and just like factual accuracy and trying to make sure that, things get kind of sustained in the right way without going over the top on that. Right. But the reality is the fact that we're even as a species having that fight in the first place. Like, I think we're pretty well into that problem at this point. So, like, again, like, what is the singularity? Has it happened already? Is it happening in the future? If it's like, if we're going to define a time frame for it, like, what the hell are we actually talking about? I would say that, like, all of these things in terms of the impact of technology on how people operate, and again, like, the role of the hacker as a frontier expression of creativity in how to take things, understand them, tip them upside down, see what falls out, make them into a better thing. We're already at a place where, like, there's a lot of impact happening on people's ability to do that, and we'll have to see where it goes from here. But yeah, you hit a button there, just in case you didn't notice.
I feel like this should be a happy hour after hours conversation now. I'm also going to make my pitch here is this kind of content and thinking, to me, is what a keynote should be. And I say that because keynotes are meant to make you think. They're meant to frame your attitude, your thinking, how you approach an event or a conference. And I call that out because I see too many keynotes that just stick on the technical. And it's like, that's what the rest of the talks in the conference are for. This kind of thinking to challenge and expand, again, how we're looking at game theory and the chessboard that we're playing at is the intent of that kind of
like, what the hell are we all doing? Like, where is this going? How do we think about that? How do we challenge lazy thinking? Which I do think, if you focus on the technical and you're in an industry like cybersecurity, or you're in like a boom industry like AI or defense, really at this point, it's very easy to just jump on the treadmill and run after the things that you're told to do. And, the idea of stepping back for a second and asking, like, where are we going with all of this and what do we actually want? I think that's a really important thing. So yeah, I agree.
So pivoting us to the practical.
Sure. Sorry.
So offense is quality assurance. Penetration testing is quality control. So let's flip this to the defensive perspective with the rise of artificial intelligence used in development ops. And I'm going to broaden the aperture of this question to you, Casey. What kinds of advice would you give, whether it is AI driven for the future, whether it is current lessons learned on development operations, that you see time and time again from your unique perch at Bugcrowd, working with so many of these kinds of shops across the world?
Yeah. I mean, firstly, like, I think the offense is quality control with benefits. So like there is a similarity between the two things. But yeah, like in terms of where, like AI powered coding, the thing, like if there's one thing that I've observed and seen over the last 12 years, it's that vulnerabilities exist as a function of liners of code, like full stop. So like the more code you generate, the higher the probability of a vulnerability and the higher the probability of that vulnerability being reachable and exploitable and, something that could be turned into actual impact becomes at that point in time. So to me, logically, like if you're generating lines of code at a higher rate, the net number of vulnerabilities that exist in the universe at that point in time increases, full stop. And, there's a lot of work that the foundational models and the SOTA models are putting into trying to address that problem and make, their models better at coding and, not introducing vulnerabilities, like doing things securely, like doing that in a way that doesn't limit, the usability of the feature that they're being asked to actually build at that point in time, all those different things. But it's just literally, to me, a faster version of the same problems that we've got in development today, which is basically like developers aren't incentivized to make a thing not do what it shouldn't. They're incentivized to make it do what it should by the date that the product manager set. So, all right, if there's a balancing act between reducing risk and like thinking about the infinite possibilities that you just talked about and trying to mitigate all of those different things versus making it do the thing that you just said it would do on the website on that day, that's how the prioritization works. And I don't think that AI is at this point any different to that in terms of how we use it to generate code. It's just, you see, like there's plenty of examples of folk that have built things that like served the feature purpose of the designer, and then had all of these like horrific unintended consequences built in that weren't found until later, because they just weren't trained or incentivized to do that. So yeah, look, I actually think it's going to increase the amount of bugs, like overall. If you think about it as a system level kind of internet problem, that's where I think we'll see that. I do think that there are opportunities. There's different people working on ways to kind of reduce that at the per app level or the per developer level. And ultimately, that's an area that I think is probably pretty important for us to focus on right now. But yeah, in terms of where it's at right now, like I do see it kind of getting worse because attack surface equals bugs QED.
So taking a step back, I think it's easy to look in hindsight once you've achieved a certain level of success and go, well, of course, it was predestined, right? But back in the beginning, I mean, bug bounties were not something that was commonly agreed to. There was a lot of confusion. There was a lot of, I think you made a reference earlier to the unwashed. So I'll just call them the hoi polloi, which is how, the business side of the world looked at the security research community. So what are some of the lessons you learned or some of the mistakes that you made as a founder along this journey?
Gosh, there's a lot coming up into that. I would say from like a mistake standpoint and from kind of a growth standpoint, you've seen, a lot of the backstory along the way. There's been, I think, directional accuracy and success that we've been able to pursue, that I've been able to kind of lead and be a part of in different ways. And then there's all of the swings and roundabouts that happen as you try to do that, right? I got asked this question earlier today, actually, and probably the biggest thing comes down to like leadership, team. Like anytime humility drops off the table and I'm not getting checked on whether or not I'm over my skis, like I'm pretty good at a bunch of different things. And I think humility, like a part of it is actually acknowledging that and saying, like, if we go to the mat on these three things, I'm going to win, full stop. But then there's everything else. And what that requires is a constant kind of posture of feedback, and surrounding yourself with people that will actually give that feedback bravely. And then learning which, whatever it is, 70, 80% of it, you should kind of ignore because you're not handing them the steering wheel. You're trying to get their help on how to do a thing. But to me, like what it comes down to is that like, sorry, my phone's going off here. I'm just going to silence this. But yeah, like the idea, like the times that I've had struggles or the times that I've seen kind of major disappointments, or felt like I've let people down or let the mission down, is usually because I've gotten too confident at that point in time, which at that point I have to balance with not being confident enough, because that can also create failure, right?
So the takeaway is don't go too far this way, don't go far that way. Goldilocks is right in the middle.
I think the takeaway is get people around you that you trust. Ask them really stupid questions, maintain those relationships, like, I promise this is not biased and not a pitch for, Bryson mentorship or mine for that matter. But like,
it goes both ways. You were ahead of me on the founder journey. I saw a lot more advice from you on that one.
You and I have had that relationship over the years, and like kind of going back to what we started, like some of the stuff that you gave to me is very strong input. Like I listened to, but I didn't agree with and didn't implement, and that was fine. And then there's a lot of things that you've kind of given as input over the years that I have taken on. I think it's probably the same in the other direction as well. So to me, that's the key. Like community ultimately is the key. I know it's kind of a cliched thing to say, but it partly depends on the type of community that you build around you and how you maintain it. Like the advice I give to founders constantly is to find people that have gone where you want to go and hopefully a little bit further. Humble yourself and ask them a bunch of really dumb shit that you're going to feel embarrassed about asking. Listen to their questions and help them understand the things that you know about where the market's going that they might not at this point in time. And then figure out, how to ignore 80% of it, because you're not handing them the steering wheel. Like you're looking to them as a mentor. Like all of those things together are really in practice hard to actually execute on, but I do think they're the right things.
Yeah. It's really hard. I mean, there's the aphorism that leadership is lonely, and being a founder is probably the loneliest position, because you're not only by definition administrative or organizationally in charge, you are by definition advancing an idea into the world, which requires change, innovation, and all of those components, which anything that has any kind of change in the world is going to be met with resistance. It's the way that the world works. There's a status quo, and it requires crazy people to challenge and change the status quo. And so how Casey and I have built that friendship over these years has been that transparency and trust, because it's hard to talk about the things you really need help about. And not going into detail, but Casey and I have shared both personal and business vulnerabilities with each other to work through those things.
Yeah.
And our private joke is we're the two Sasquatches. And so that's what we actually we're texting with each other about how we were going to be squatching today, because we are Sasquatches.
Yeah. I think, I mean, and thank you. And I've said this, a bunch of times before, but saying it on air, because I do mean it. To me, my favorite definition of a founder is someone who gets irrationally pissed off about a thing that they think that they can solve. And that idea of it being irrational to the outside world, that's almost a fundamental feature, I think, of taking something on and committing yourself to it in all ways that you have to, and actually seeing it play out over time. And a lot of folk do fail. There's success bias coming out here in some ways right now. It hasn't all been success, but you get what I mean there. But yeah, this idea of our job as founders is to take chaos. One of my favorite quotes is the elements of the order are hidden in the chaos, right? And to me, our job is to take chaos and create order out of it in a way that creates value and solves problems. And that's inherently insane. That's not been done before. So this whole idea of imposter syndrome, yeah, of course you're going to have that. This hasn't been done before. You are literally, by definition, as someone who's supremely confident about the vision of the future that you've got, you're an imposter. That's just part of the deal. So there's all these different things that kind of, filter into it that, I think are really, valuable to just recognize and kind of understand. I used to I still do it every now and then, but, the Startmate crew from Australia would come out and, we'd take them around the office, and I'd sit them down and give them what I called the demotivational talk. It's here's all the shit that people don't tell you about, that you don't read in TechCrunch. This is hard. It's awesome. And it's worth it, I believe. But here's some of the stuff that you're going to find really challenging along the way. And also, if you've got the right things in place to be able to actually navigate those things, and you're in a position to still take on the potential for that future pain, then you're the right person to do this. So feel encouraged by this, but also here's a heads up. Do you know what I mean? Just being in a position to be able to kind of color that stuff in for folk. It's not trying to talk them out of it. It's trying to let them know, this is, in my experience, how it works.
Your quote on the definition of a founder being irrationally pissed off is a much better quote than you previously given me that I use in my entrepreneurship class. So I think I'm going to update your slide, because that's a much better one.
What was the old one? I forget that. Sorry.
Here, I'll look it up. Where are you? Loading. Okay. Where's Casey? I can just do a search for Casey. Oh, you know what? I'm wrong. Your quote. I have that one. For some reason, I had it summarized. That a founder is someone who gets irrationally pissed off about a problem they think they can solve.
Yeah.
And then you're above Jake Williams, who says the biggest thing I noticed is to find the thing you do best and focus on that thing.
Yeah.
So that quote is in my class. I clearly know my material really well, which is going to speak well to be teaching it tomorrow night.
There you go.
Which will be streamed, by the way. There is going to be, my class will be streamed, and you'll be able to see Casey's bright and shining face tomorrow as well in that class. And I'm sure Daphne will post the link here in the chat in a minute. Cool. So one of the things that I always like to talk about is what's the definition of success, right? Building a company has different definitions. And I think one of them is growing to a scale where the position outgrows you.
Yeah.
And you certainly have done that already a few years ago. Mm-hmm. What was that like?
Hard. Because at the same time, you're wanting to lead it, you're wanting to be involved in it. I do believe that there's, this idea, I'm a huge advocate of hiring people, only hiring people to scare. Hello.
I'm back.
Are we good? I tried as best I can for that not to distract me right now, but probably failed. Yeah, the idea of like hiring people that scare you and that could take your job. Like, to me, if you believe like you're doing one of two things, you're building a company to make sure that you've got like long-term future, job security as someone who has control over a bunch of people that do a mediocre thing. And the purpose of that company is the business and the revenue that it generates, and that's it, right? And there's some, like, the challenging part is that there's some merit to that, because as you go along, you have to transition from a pure mission drive to actually being able to increase enterprise value, like build ARR, all these different things that happen kind of on the company side. The other thing, or the other side of that to me, is this idea of like, you're just blindly passionate about a mission that is going to create value in the future. And you need a whole bunch of help to figure that out, but the parts that you're bringing to that. And then, going back to what I said before, the things that you're not as good at. So like, you hire people that can scare the fuck out of you and actually take the overall mission forward. That to me has always been a hiring principle I've tried to follow. Like, I really do believe that about team and about the people that I try to surround myself with. Actually executing on stepping back, like, that's hard. And I think, founders or founder CEOs that have done that will get that. Most other folk might not in the same way, because it is like an objectively like demanding job. And, there is elements of like, oh, I'm kind of relieved to not be doing that anymore, that I think most other folk would kind of look in and see. But yeah, like, to me, really what it comes down to is making sure that you're always thinking about what's going to take the vision of where you want to take the thing forward. And if you're doing it right, like, it reflects itself. Like, to me, success is the thing that you set out to build, manifesting itself in terms of, the vision and the true impact that you saw in the first place, but also in an economic sense. Like, if you can get both of those, that's golden. And I think that's really hard to do, but to me, that's like the North Star, right?
All right, this is going to be our last question from the audience, and then I'm going to come to you, Casey, for your final thoughts. I feel like we covered some of this, but I want to put it here just to give a chance to pull out some of the nuance that might be there. Do you feel it's possible to use artificial intelligence to engineer out threat landscape vectors to the point where some zero net could be achieved? How would we need to reimagine end user protocols to achieve success?
I'm trying to pass out that question a little bit.
That's why I threw it up there for both of us, because I was kind of like, I thought I went one way and I thought another, and I'm trying to do that while listening to you at the same time. And so I figured this would be a joint vulnerability research problem on the question.
Yeah, I do. You saw it, like, I think we saw it with like the bill that was tabled in Congress last week around letters of marque, and this idea of like normalizing. I don't why don't we get into that? Just as a sidebar, like, this is something that I've been kind of predicting for about 3 years. I don't like it in terms of it being kind of the future of where the internet's going. But to me, again, we're back to issues of physics. But this idea of like engineering cost into the attacker in a way that we're not currently really kind of executing on, especially in the West. I do think that AI has a role to play in that. And I do think that's a part of where we're going to end up.
So the letter of marque, this has been bandied about for a couple of decades, and it goes back to the British strategy of using mercenaries to combat the Spanish fleet. And then it's what they used to essentially extend mercantile disruption on behalf of national security, because at that time it was the age of the ocean. And we see the same thing on the internet, and the debate has been hack back. The Russians, the GRU did something to my company. I want to get them. I'll let you go first.
Yeah. So, I mean, like I said, a part of like what I don't like about this is that there's a sense of like gentlemanness on the internet that the West kind of abides to, that I do think maintains some sort of degree of order globally, not just in the West. And we're pretty much actively kind of saying at this point that we need to abandon that and move into a season where it's ungentlemanly. Part of that bothers me because I think there's a lot of collateral damage that potentially gets created as a part of that. So putting that part aside, it's also why I have anyone who's seen the Ministry of Ungentlemanly Cyber sticker that I was giving out at DEF CON, like this is the thinking behind that. Where I think it's kind of valuable and useful and inevitable is it's a couple of different things. One is that like there's groups that have been effectively, off grid doing this type of thing to be in a position to understand where threat actors are going to, attack, like what they've been successful in doing, effectively augmenting some of the IC and some of the different things that have been going on. Like that's been a thing for the better part of 10 years now. And it's not something that people talk about a lot, but it's a real thing. So there's that. Then you look at like the IT cyber army and what happened off the back of the kickoff of the Russo-Ukrainian conflict. Like that stuff is straight up illegal for most folk that are outside of Ukraine. But everyone was fine with it. So, okay, cool. That to me is a pattern that predicts the future in some ways. Japan just passed a hackback, legislation package. I think it was 12 months ago. So like, this is one of those things where I think governments are starting to realize that like we suck at defense. Like we suck at writing code that isn't exploitable. We're doing as best we can with all of those different things. But at the end of the day, if the attackers want to do their thing, they'll be able to do that thing. And we need to start to find different ways to solve that problem. So, yeah, that's where I think it's at.
So I've probably been one of the most vocal against the idea because that tread on what MySpace used to be. And that was ours. And that was the province of certain legal authorities that we had.
Yes.
And here's my first point. Going back to where I've been talking about the technical and the people aspect of it is the only thing that stops an organization is targeting the operators, right? Worst thing you can do, cybering, hacking me back is what?
Or their model.
Destroy a computer.
Yeah, destroy or create uncertainty in their model. Like I think a lot of what like DOJ and FBI
that's not what we're
done.
attacking the social construct. And that's an interesting thing. I think I probably have talked to you about some of that in the past because I do agree on that. And then I think it's important when you talked about the Ukrainian hacktivism that's being done in the conflict is the fact that's a war, right? We are in a legal definition of a war, and by definition, kind of everything sort of goes to some degree. But here's where I started to warm to the idea. First of all, almost all the infrastructure of all these things that are happening are commercial. And for a long time, I used to chastise the US government who thought they were doing great things. I'm like, actually, you know what? Microsoft and Google are doing most of the work. Verizon's doing most of the work, right? Those folks are actively managing their infrastructure and shutting these things down and are being much more aggressive. And by the way, much more effective than what we were seeing from the US government. And so, and by the way, a lot of my former teams now work at those places. So they do know what they're doing. They are qualified. They know how to do these things. I think we get into a risk of an ungentlemanly situation, but the reality is we already are there.
We're kind of there now.
Already pointed out we have a friction point of different value systems coming together, and those aren't going to resolve any other way.
Yeah, I think that's right. And when you think about, like how that's been resolved in the past, like the idea of, special operations groups, like different kind of discrete sets of capability to get things done. Like that's already exists. I think that becoming a thing that we talk about more openly, and that becoming a more kind of regular part of how we do, deterrence. Like deterrence is an interesting one because like I've got a lot of friends that have worked in like nuclear effect type work. And to me, this idea of mutually assured destruction being a part of why the internet hangs together in the first place, because it's so fragile. I kind of like the math and the economics of that. But the reality is that like, if you have a bomb dropped on you, like it's a binary thing. Whereas in the cyber realm, it's really kind of a matter of how dependent you are on critical infrastructure within your society. So it's not deterrent or mad in the same way like that. But all of these things are bubbling up.
We got to wrap up. We're past time.
Yep.
So okay. I'm going to run the raffle and then I'm going to come back to you. So
cool.
Reminder, good comments and everything gets you entered for the raffle. Why am I blanking on how to do this part? Oh yeah, just do it.
Ew.
The winner is CW. CW, reach out to us at info@scythe.io and we will get you set up with free swag from swag.scythe.io. Get your unicorn gear. All of the proceeds go to helping save chubby rhinos. Chubby unicorns, also known as endangered rhinos. We partnered with a conservation effort for that. Casey, cool. Last thoughts that you want to leave us with from the audience?
Honestly, like hack the planet, I think is really the summary of all of this. We've covered a whole bunch of ground. I really appreciate the partnership with you, the partnership between Bugcrowd and Scythe, like working out how to make the internet safer and help people understand how to do that more effectively. And yeah, I think, when it comes to all the other stuff that we talked about, like we're in really interesting times. And I think, for folk to have opinions, like bring them to bear, build the things that you think that you should build or be a part of building those things. If you're not, if you don't necessarily have that founder appetite, that's fine too. There's a lot that we can get done at this point in time. And I think it's time to step up.
Tune in to the next Unicorn Dispatch Live. I will have Dr. Paul Rosenzweig on in 2 weeks, and we're going to be talking about what does this new administration mean for cybersecurity.